You all ready? Okay. All right. Be glad to take any questions that you might have.
I was just going to ask, can you reflect a little bit as to when you came into office, what were the city's finances like, and given the challenges that you might have faced then, were you more cognizant this time, leaving office, to what the next mayor is going to find in terms of the budget itself and just,
Well, that's a great question, slightly complicated. So when we came, none of us, of course, knew that, according to the federal government, the Great Recession had actually started in December of 2007. I was sworn in January of 2008. Our first budget, my recollection was a great budget. Numerous investments in a variety of areas. I think we increased funding for community college, parks and recreation, a bunch of areas, continued the business and wage tax reductions. It was a great budget. It was passed, I think actually it was passed early, sometime in May. No issue. We had a great set of hearings, council actively engaged and involved. So that was that period. Excuse me. In, I think it was July of 2008, Rob and our first chief of staff, Clay Armbruster, came to see me. Let me back up for 1 second, and Rob will correct me about any of these details. The one thing that we did see in that first budget was an unusual drop in the real estate transfer tax. All other taxes were going the way they were anticipated in the then FY08 budget. So, when we come in, there's already a budget in place, which had been put in place by Mayor Street. That was the FY08 budget. But, everything else seemed to be fine. We adjusted for it. That July, the team really started to see other changes in other taxes. Again, we didn't know what was going on, but we saw that something was going on. In August, it was crystal clear that there was a certain level of economic distress. And on September 11th, 2008, is when I first announced to the public that we had at least, the emphasis on the word at least, because we knew it was going to grow, unfortunately, at least a $450 million five-year plan deficit. That was on a Thursday. That subsequent weekend is when Lehman Brothers crashed. The following week, banks and other businesses literally went out of business. The presidential campaign was going on. Then Senator Barack Obama and Senator John McCain basically had to come off the campaign trail for the presidential election to get back to Washington to vote for TARP, which was President Bush's program, because by then they acknowledged in September that there was this recession going on that had started back in December, which no one knew. The Phillies won the World Series, big parade. The election took place. Barack Obama obviously won, and 2 days later, we announced that we had a $1 billion five-year plan deficit. And as they say, you know the rest of that story. We spent from the winter of 2008 till probably the winter of 2011, on a downward trajectory in terms of our revenues, and then things finally stabilized, that we weren't losing money. And we've been rebuilding ever since. We raised a couple of taxes for the city. In the meantime, the economic recovery plan by now President Obama came into effect in February of 2009. School districts, SEPTA, all various agencies received this big infusion of dollars. We, on the other hand, were kind of bleeding revenues, and that's why we cut services, raised taxes, cut our salaries, did all of those really bad things, and announced some other bad things, which I talked about upstairs. Since then, the economic picture has really shifted. more to the school district side with the at least double whammy, if you will, of the expiration of economic recovery dollars, the massive cuts in 2011 after the 2010 election with Governor Corbett, and rising school costs. So maybe it's a triple hit, all at the same time. The elimination of the charter school reimbursement line item, it's $110 million right off the top, and other cuts. And so we have really spent the last 5 years more focused on the school district's finances and our role in that part, and which is why I said, since FY11, we've actually not raised taxes for city services and our city general fund. And so things have really shifted. We were in economic crisis early on, recovered, or on a path to recovery, and now the school district finds itself almost literally in the same position we did back in 08, 09, 10, and 11. But I mean, it's the great stewardship of the finance office, Rob DeBow and Rebecca Reinhardt as the budget director, Nancy Winkler as our treasurer. I mean, she really talks to those agencies, and I think the end result is that we have an A rating from all 3 rating agencies. Now, for many people, that might not mean a whole lot. If you're borrowing money, it does mean a lot. If people are looking to do business here, it means a lot. And so, that's what's been going on. It's always been about the finances of the city, first and foremost. You can't do anything if you don't have any money.
But my question is for the next mayor, though, how are you going to walk into the city finances? I mean, the pension seems to be a pretty big problem as well.
Pension has been a continual problem for a long period of time, but as I announced, under what Governor Wolf has proposed, over the next 5 years, you'll have $400 million going into the pension fund, including, of course, our payments, including, of course, the reforms that we've been able to achieve through either contract negotiations or arbitration. We have not run the numbers yet. We will, but I would think that if all of those elements happen, you would actually be able to see a path for financial security, for the pension fund. I would think in the next, 10 to 15 years, which, in the life of a pension fund is actually not a long period of time. But, I mean, that will be impactful in a very, very significant way down the line.
Mayor,
Yes.
how big is the if, though? If council passes it, if the state legislature passes what Governor Wolf has asked us to do, how big is that?
Well, I'll probably have a shorter answer on the state side because, I mean, you just never know what's going to happen in Harrisburg. I think Governor Wolf, I was there for his budget address. I mean, it's clearly one of the, boldest pronouncements about, not only funding education, but jump-starting job creation, the combination of tax cuts and the need, obviously, to increase some taxes to pay for some other things. I think they put a lot of time and effort into it. I think it's really smart. Governor Wolf will have to figure out from a pure, and I say this in a positive way, a pure policy and, political strategy, what will he have to give in order to get? I mean, that's just the way it works, right? And, the House and the Senate have majorities, both Republican, and the governor is a Democrat. So, but I think he is determined to try to figure this out. It'll be fraught with all kinds of danger and consternation and people being upset and all of those kinds of things. But there's no way in the world, in my view, and I've said this to the governor, so it's not telling tales out of school. I mean, there's no way to get a big thing without doing a big thing. And I think that's going to be that discussion up there. For here, one way or the other, over the last 4 to 5 years, we have put $362 million of new money on the table for the schools and for educating our kids. And I thought it important that when Dr. Height sent the letter to both myself and President Clark, I mean, separate letters, but pretty much the same letter, laying out, asking for $103 million from the city, $206 million from the Commonwealth, that for me, it would have been, so I'll back up a little bit. Most of the time, over the past few years, we've usually found out what the request was later than my budget address. And so we always knew that we were going to have to do something, but we didn't know how much. This time, I got that letter, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. So we've all known that this was the request. So for me, putting forward a budget, it would have been irresponsible not to try to address that request. The need is clear. The plan that the superintendent laid out literally just yesterday, I mean, is a monumental shift in providing educational services. We can't dispute the need. The district has cut over $700 million in services and programs. They're down 5,000 people. We know that there are not enough counselors, nursing services, programs, AP courses, security issues, and the like. And so I think we're literally just at a point that those of us in elective office, and whether it's as an executive putting something forward or as a council member who has to vote, I mean, it's, you know, that's what they do for a living, the choice is clear. You're either going to support educating our students or you're not. Property owners, if their taxes go up, no, they won't be happy. But, I mean, the cost of lack of education is higher than any tax bill you're going to pay. And when you now look at the combination of what we've proposed and what the governor has proposed in terms of property tax relief, if you can just get through FY16 with the new tax bill, which for some will be higher, they're all going to be lower in FY17. But this is about educating children. So, I mean, it's just time for us as adults to step up and do the right thing, as we've been doing. So credit goes to City Council. I mean, no one was excited about raising the taxes that we have over the past few years, but it is to educate children who cannot speak for themselves, they cannot vote, their voices often are not being heard. It is our responsibility as elected officials to do what's right by them. So that's why we have hearings. We'll go through the process. We'll see what happens. But I think, you know, the eyes of Philadelphia and Harrisburg are watching what will happen down here.
You know, you sounded pretty emotional a couple of times through your budget address. Did that emotion come up kind of unexpectedly, or did you anticipate you were going to have those feelings as you were in a vast budget?
Yeah. So, you know, I know you all might not notice this all the time, but on some issues, on a number of things, I mean, I'm actually a pretty emotional person. I care very, very passionately. The people in this building, the folks that I've worked with, there are so many things that you see us do in public, and then, you know, there are so many other things that happen, you know, in meetings and discussions and other things. It is like a family here. We get to know each other in a variety of ways. And so, you know, if I'm talking about, you know, Gloria Cazares or Joan Markman or, you know, Lieutenant Joyce Craig, I mean, that's tough. When I talk about my family and think about, and their families, and think about the, you know, I mean, there are a group of people. I had a phone call at 4 o'clock this morning. I mean, who does that, right, to deal with the snow? I mean, that's slightly disruptive in your household, you know. The nights, the weekends, and all the other stuff that goes with it. And we're public servants, and nobody complains. But I know that these things go on. And I ask these folks to come into this government to serve, and almost everyone has stayed. That means something to me. And so, I mean, but it happens. I feel it about to happen, and I got to try to get myself together. I've been trying not to cry in public for 20 years. Yeah, Vern. Yeah.
How's that going, and what's your anticipation for later today in terms of overall?
Yeah, I mean, we can get you some numbers on, I mean, I don't know how many cars have been taken off. I mean, the snow emergency went into effect at 6 a.m., and, you know, I mean, as we've told folks 8 million times over at least my 7+ years, don't park on a snow emergency route after we declare a snow emergency. So, but we'll get you some information about that. I know it's getting a little rough out there. One thing I should mention, there have been some inaccurate rumors floating around about SEPTA service. SEPTA service is up and running, and they're doing everything they can to maintain the service. They have been moving some equipment around. to, deal with some of the conditions out there, but they are active, and like I said, there were some inaccurate reports out there about that. Before I shift into that, let me just try to deal with all the budget-related issues, if there are any more on that. Mike? Yeah. Right. Sure. I know, and I understand that. So, I mean, one of the examples I give in this, and I'm very, very sensitive to that, but again, I mean, I do have to point out, it was about 30% of our property owners actually saw an increase, and they vary from, could be $100 to, I mean, obviously on the high end, there's some, high-end properties out there, and people saw a pretty decent hike. But 70% saw no change, or their tax bill actually went down. And what I would say is, I mean, it's kind of like this. I mean, if I came to you and said, Mike, I need $100, and you said, well, I mean, I only have like 40. I'd take it, obviously. But you can't be surprised when I come back 2 weeks from now or a year from now and say, hey, I need $60. And you'd say, well, but I gave you 40. And I'd say, but I asked for 100. And so then maybe you give me another 20. And so what's been going on with the school district is the reason that they have had to come back year after year after year is that combined, none of us have ever given them what they actually asked for. And then some people get upset that they come back and quote unquote ask for more. In most instances, they're not really asking for more, they're asking for what they asked for in the first place and didn't get. And so they've been pursuing, to finish out that analogy, I mean, they've been constantly pursuing, trying to get that $100. In the meantime, as you well know, every year you have other costs that go up. So I ask you for the 100, you give me 40, I come back, my cost is now higher, so actually I might ask you for 70. And then you give me 20. So now I'm coming back the following year, not for 50, but maybe for 60, because I'm never getting where I'm trying to get to. They've asked us for 103. I put 105 on the table. They asked the state for 206. Governor Wolf has put 160 on the table. This is probably the closest they've ever been at 265 off of a 309 request to getting anywhere near what they've asked for. But at least with the 265, that deficit will actually go away. It's probably for the first time in a number of years over the past few years. So I get it, I understand it. As I said, I don't like asking folks for a tax increase, but I do want to educate their kids. And so that is the conundrum, I think, for all of us. It's the same thing often on the city side. Folks want a whole lot of service, but nobody wants to pay for it. Everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die. I mean, you got to figure it out. I mean, you're either getting one or the other, but we're not doing both, right? So, I mean, that's the story. They keep coming back because collectively, even with what we've done, they've never received all of what they asked for to fill a hole and make investments. We've spent the last few years just trying to fill the hole, never giving them an additional dime to hire a teacher or a security officer or an AP teacher or anything else. We've been giving them the same level of inadequate service for the last few years. In a more private moment, I'll tell you what I really call that. Did you want to ask me something? Yeah, no, that's not going out. Yes.
So if the school district got what the city and state have put on the table right now, they would not come next year and say we need additional dollars?
I'm not going to speak for Dr. Height. What I haven't seen is how these proposals, if they were in fact to happen, what's a 5-year plan look like in that regard? And, are they balanced and they now do 5-year plans? So I haven't seen that. But I'm left with the impression that even at these numbers, if they were to receive that amount of funding, it is certainly putting the district on a path to financial stability. That's what happened with us. That's why we had to come back to taxpayers a couple times, and now we are. And the same thing ultimately really has to happen with the school district. But I'm not going to speak for Dr. Height and his finance team. But this Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I think have been seismic shifts in what public education is supposed to be about in the Commonwealth and in the city of Philadelphia. And we all need to take note of that and try to figure out how we move forward. Mike?
To follow up on Holly's question, I think the uncertainty over knowing what's coming next year, the year beyond, is, to go back to the analogy of the $100, I think some residents believe that it's a never-ending ask. Every year is more.
I understand.
They aren't told $100.
Right.
It's just this big question mark in every year.
I disagree with the last part of that. The district makes a specific request every year. They made a specific request last year.
But then, and Holly's question was, well, how do we know we're not going to go through the same thing with a new request next year?
Well, how about if we try something new? How about if we actually give them pretty much what they've asked for? See how that works. You remember $303 million? We didn't fill that. We didn't fulfill that request. And so if, again, all of this comes to fruition, I think now the one thing we know is that your tax bill is actually going to go down in FY17. We know that. Right. There are a lot of ifs here. That's what happens on the first day of the budget. A whole lot of ifs, and you go through the whole process. So, I mean, I think people need to hear the whole story. They need to understand all the parts. There'll be some tax increases over here. There'll be some tax reductions over here. And at the end of the day, in FY17, most of our citizens, most of our property owners will actually be paying less in FY17 than they were in FY15. And educating kids, which I think is still a major responsibility, certainly of the government and of taxpayers. But, I mean, there's no getting around that. I mean, you want high-quality schools, you got to pay for them. Werner? Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, nobody likes paying taxes. I mean, we do, right? But, you know, you might not like paying $1.29 for a loaf of bread at the supermarket, but if you want the loaf of bread, you're going to put your $1.29 on the table. Otherwise, you know, find something else to eat. And of course, because it's snowing, there'll be a lot of bread sold today. You know, this is the, you know, French toast capital of the world. So, but yeah, I mean, we, of course, in both bodies, we have no idea what the legislators are actually going to do, but I think people have to come to grips with, we want to educate our children or not. I mean, it's a real fundamental. This is not rocket science. It's not science. This is a real yes or no. Educate kids, don't educate kids. Pick one. Yes? No, not at the moment. Yes?
What's the impact of the election on your political? Do you think it'll be harder since not all councils are voting?
Hard to say. I mean, you know, this is obviously. I mean, I've run for. This is the first. This is the first time in 28 years that I haven't been a candidate. So this is a quite unusual election season. What I expect is that, I mean, just like in last year's race, governor's race, my expectation is that education should be the #1 issue in this race, whether you're running for mayor or city council. There's no more important issue in the city right now than education, in my view, and funding the education of students. And so I would expect that voters will probably ask mayoral candidates and council members, what are you going to do to fund education for our kids? I would strongly encourage them to have an answer. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the investment in LNI and how much of the special commission report you were able to address this budget was?
A significant amount of the report was addressed. There are some elements, which we can get you the details on that subsequent to this. There are some elements of that large report which had either 37 or 38 recommendations that require a lot more in-depth study, operational analysis, and those kinds of things. The department had already started implementing some of the recommendations literally from day one. We then needed to analyze some others that really did require money and staffing and training and those kinds of things, and that's what we put forward today. FY15, $5.5 million with 43 new employees, and then it ramps up to an additional $10.8 million by FY18 with a total of 101 new employees. So I think a significant amount of that report will be implemented over that period of time. Some of it is very technical in nature, training that has to be involved, hiring processes, and those kinds of things. So we want to do it in a smart way, but I mean, we are being aggressive at the same time. Let me take one or two others. Yeah.
Let's just ask, with the changing the ratio, you know, if you increase the school tax, it's going to be shifting, I think, to 59-41. Council had previously suggested changing the ratio to 60-40, but my understanding is the administration was against that. Can you talk about the difference now?
Well, the ratio change now is just because we're raising the revenues only on one side. You know, I think I focus more on how much money we're actually sending over or trying to send over in the first instance as opposed to what the ratio is. I mean, I think that's, you know, that ratio can be used for a lot of different things. The issue here is how much cash are you sending? And so I focus a little less probably on the ratio than I do on how much money we're actually sending over to the district. And in this instance, more would be going. Mike and then Holly.
To what degree, if any, did you consider any reductions in city services in order to get to at least a portion of
I mean, you know, I think I'd have to say, you know, it's not like we have excess services here in the city. We've made a lot of cuts over the past number of years. And, you know, when you make cuts, you have to also be able to sustain them over the long haul. This is not, you know, one-time, you know, revenue sources, or, you know, you make one change, you save $10 million, but it's not recurring. The school district, education funding needs stable, dependable, recurring funding sources, and that is, you know, primarily done through stable, recurring tax measures that have a track record and a history. Property tax is, you know, one of the most stable, unless, you know, you end up in another economic crisis or something like that. So, I mean, we run a pretty efficient government. We're always looking for savings over on the city side, but there comes a point in time when you just literally have to put more money on the table. The superintendent asked for $103 million more. It would be, we'd be back. We would be back in, you know, 08, 09, 2010 levels and strategies, trying to take $103 million out of the city's general fund, which just damages services for which another group of folks are going to be upset about that as well. So, I mean, there just comes a point where you have to put serious money on the table. Holly? Through what?
Through asset sales, like that's PWW.
Right. Well, I understand that, but I mean, again, I understand the question. Again, an asset sale is a one-time event. It's not recurring. I mean, it's not like you can sell it every year for, you know, the next 15 years. So, I mean, that's not a viable source. The property tax is one of the most stable, dependable, recurring funding sources. It is the largest funding source that comes from the city for funding public education. We raised the use and occupancy tax a couple years ago for schools. And so, in my view at least, the most straightforward path to getting the funding that's needed and recognizing that we now have this new element, which is the significant proposed property tax relief coming from Governor Wolf's budget, that was the most logical and straightforward path to secure this funding and know that it's going to be there. And that's what this really has to be about. Thank you all. Thanks. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I have returned. Yeah. So, snow, weather. Got it. The city allowed our non-essential personnel, they know who they are, to leave today at 1 p.m., or for those of you who are more military-oriented, that would be 1,300 hours, if we really want to get into this. At the Fire Administration Building at 11:40 today, 3.2 inches of snow was reported. I assume there's probably a little more than that out there now. Snow emergency remains in effect until further notice. Towing operations are ongoing. Philadelphia Police Department and the Philadelphia Parking Authority report at least 70 vehicles being relocated as of 11:30. PATCO and Amtrak are operating on a what everyone knows as a snow schedule for them. The DRPA speed restrictions remain at 25 miles an hour for the Walt Whitman, Ben Franklin, and Betsy Ross bridges. SEPTA bus routes 18, 35, 139, the L, the H, the XH. Service is suspended until further notice. There are 43 bus detours system-wide, and obviously you can go on SEPTA's website to get additional information. PennDOT crews were deployed on state highways. Road conditions were considered slushy and unfortunately will continue to deteriorate. Speed remains restricted at 45 miles an hour on state highways. Philadelphia Streets Department reports a full plowing operation underway, 350 pieces of equipment in service. That should probably translate usually into about 500 to 600 personnel involved. Salting operations are primarily in our known problem areas. Full salting operations will begin when road conditions warrant. Streets request that authorized parking around the triplex area be cleared of parked vehicles this evening to allow for snow removal. Parks and Recreation is supporting the plowing operation with various vehicles. I would take it that the Water Department is probably doing the same. Philadelphia Fire Department reports 36 ALS units and 18 BLS units are in service citywide. And there are a number of units that are currently available for service. That means they are not out on active runs. Philadelphia International Airport reports few delays, numerous cancellations, currently advising travelers, of course, to check with your airline. City of Philadelphia Code Blue is in effect. Cafes are open and operating, and additional beds have been made available. If you see someone in Philadelphia experiencing homelessness under these conditions, please call the 24-hour homeless outreach hotline, 215-232-1984. Lastly, obviously for the public, we encourage you to monitor the weather impacts on utility, transportation, health, and medical sectors. As I always do, an appeal to everyone, please look out for sick and shut-in, our vulnerable citizens, many of whom are senior citizens. Also, please do not leave your pets out in this weather. It is horrible weather, and actually you can be fined for doing that. Latest report here, snow, steady temperatures around 25. There is a 100% chance of precipitation. I think I got that one right. And the daytime snow accumulation is estimated at 3 to 7 inches. And we'll give you further updates as they occur, but that's what's going on. Bernard? 1, yes. Yeah, and they were all notified. I'm sorry. It's estimated somewhere between 10 and 12,000 people. Yes. Yeah. It's a big government. Spring is coming. That's why I wore my green tie today. It is going to happen. I am pleased to announce today that spring will in fact take place in the city of Philadelphia. We are strongly supporting we're strongly supporting this initiative and expect full implementation sometime in late April, early May. I will get back to you with any further details on that initiative. Spring is coming. Thank you. Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Yeah. I'll get back to you in the spring about that too. Oh my goodness.